All right, so for those of you who are on live feed, this is going to be the lecture portion of the Colorado concealed handgun permit. If you want to get your Colorado concealed handgun permit, you can go to my website, AAAcoach.com, and you can sign up from there. Otherwise, you can email me, Dave@AAAcoach.com. I have a customer here, and we're going to get on with it. Okay, so obviously, you're here for the Colorado concealed handgun permit. So let's start off with why you would like to get your Colorado concealed handgun permit.
Why? Well, I'm a single dad.
Mm-hmm.
Raising my daughter at home, I got to hold at home actually.
Yeah.
Whatever, go groceries. We came from pretty safe states, Hawaii, Iowa.
Yeah.
Not too much violence.
Gotcha.
And don't get me wrong, Colorado is a beautiful state, but whoever's prepared, not prepared, I'd say.
Yeah. Be prepared than not prepared. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely that's that for my daughter's safety and I.
Okay.
If I'm not here, that's
Right. And you just traveled from Utah, is that right?
Wyoming.
Wyoming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're surrounded by freedom-loving states that don't require classes like this.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that the class isn't beneficial. All right, we're going to cover some laws. We're going to cover a bunch of stuff that people should know to stay out of trouble, right? If that makes sense.
Right.
A lot of times, I think individuals just think they know the law, and they can skirt the law. And in this class, we're going to cover some of those things that some may not understand. So before we get into authority of purpose, I'm a retired Special Forces weapons sergeant. I have been fortunate enough to retire after 24 years, and I've started this thing just to provide, in my point of view, excellent service to those who want it. Basically, there's some other trainers out there. I'm not going to put them down, but they have different ways to train people, if that makes sense. And I think my way is obviously I'm biased. I think my way is the best, right? So let's get on with this. So this is the authority of purpose. Okay, so Part 2, Article 12, Title 18 of the Colorado Revised Statute. It states that an instructor currently, actually not really currently, it starts 1 July, but the El Paso County Sheriff's Department, they're not taking applications that do not have the new requirements because they're so backlogged. Okay? So, starting in July, a verified instructor has to be listed on a county sheriff's website. I am on El Paso County's website, so no big deal there. Because I had to submit an application to be a verified instructor. So people get their terms, verified and certified mixed up. You could be a certified instructor, let's say from NRA or USCCA or something like that. But to be a verified instructor, quote unquote, that is in accordance with the law, starting 1 July. All right, so that's how that works. Let's go to the next one. So you're going to do an open book exam, and you're going to do 50 rounds in the range minimum. I use 100 rounds, or at least enough to make sure that you understand safe handling of a firearm. Okay. All right. So this is the things we can go over: use of deadly physical force and physical force, state laws, local laws, codes, ordinances relating to weapons and the use of force, and federal firearms laws. Okay. Some general handgun knowledge. Weapons handling is going to be on the range. We won't be able to do the live portion on that because YouTube will flip out. During and after an incident. And then this is probably the most important, is this during and after an incident.
Yeah.
Well, actually, probably before, right? So you can avoid the situation.
Right.
That's probably important. During the event, of course, that's what we're talking about, weapons handling in the form of self-defense. And then after the event, now becomes the most important, because now you have to protect yourself from potentially a rogue prosecutor that's going to say, well, I think he committed murder, right? But you're going to use self-defense as the affirmative defense in a court of law, if that makes sense, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll get right into the state laws. Okay, so Title 18 of the Colorado Revised Statute, or CRS, okay? That covers the criminal code. And most of your gun laws are in the criminal code, okay? These laws that are covered in this lesson are not all-inclusive, and I am not a lawyer. I do highly suggest that you actually talk to a lawyer about things, and then we'll get into maybe some self-defense coverage later on. There's some options out there. I have my preference, and I'm also an affiliate. But because I'm an affiliate doesn't mean that I'm biased. I've actually done a little bit of research on it. Okay. And then, especially when it comes to deadly physical force or physical force, you absolutely should know what the state, I hate to say allows you to do, but what the state says is legal and illegal, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. Some very important definitions we need to cover when it comes to the law. Bodily injury, deadly physical force, a deadly weapon, okay, dwelling, and a firearm. Now, some of these seem like they're inherent to the actual name. For example, deadly physical force. However, if you look at that, it really defines it down to the T, right? So just because you use deadly physical force and you do produce death on an individual, yeah, that's deadly physical force. But things that are likely to produce death also is covered in that deadly physical force. Okay, so force intended, natural, probable consequence of which is to produce death and which does in fact produce death. Okay, so that's CRS 181901. Okay, now. So let's just throw a scenario out there. If you draw your firearm and point it at somebody, is that deadly physical force? I would say it would be. If I was a prosecutor, I could argue that the defendant pulled his firearm and pointed it at somebody, showing their intent to use deadly physical force. Does that make sense? All right. So then we can talk about bodily injury, which means physical pain, illness, or an impairment of physical or mental condition. Okay. Now we'll get in here. Deadly weapon is pretty straightforward. Okay, but let's remember here, deadly weapon can mean just about anything. Your fist, your hands, a hammer, like whatever, alcohol, right? So it could mean just about anything. So just because you use your fist, let's say in a fist fight, doesn't necessarily mean that's not a deadly weapon. Okay? A dwelling. Basically, the way I can sum this up is a dwelling is anything that's not meant to live in. What we are in right now at Knox Gun Club is a dwelling. Does that make sense? Yeah. And we're going to talk about home later. And then firearm, that's basically anything. That's pretty plain German. All right. Okay, so public place means a place to which the public or substantial number of the public has access to. Okay, so this is a public place, kind of thing. Okay. Serious bodily injury, and there's a distinction. Remember, we're talking about bodily injury and serious bodily injury now. Just like there's a distinction between physical force and deadly physical force. Okay? So serious bodily injury means bodily injury that either at the time of the actual injury, okay, or later. So if I hit you, and then later on you have a brain aneurysm or something like that, that could also constitute serious bodily injury. Okay? Involves a substantial risk of death, a substantial risk of serious permanent disfigurement, substantial risk of protracted loss or impairment of function, of any organ of the body, or breaks, fractures, or penetrating knife, or penetrating gunshot wounds, burns of the second degree or third degree, right? So it's a pretty broad definition, but it kind of gives you what they're talking about, right? Okay. Tamper means to interfere with something improperly, to meddle with, or to make unwarranted alterations in its condition. Okay, so we'll talk about this a little bit more, okay, because I like to harp on this. If you draw your firearm in a self-defense situation and you fire, let's say 2 rounds, 3 rounds, what it doesn't matter how many rounds, right? Should you or should you not render the firearm safe, like clear and unloading it before the law enforcement officers show up? Difficult, huh? Here's what I tell my customers. Do not unload it or clear it for whatever reason. You can put it in your holster. You can put it in a safe spot. But if you unload the firearm and clear it, they could potentially, I'm not saying they would, I'm just saying they could, say you tampered with evidence. Right? Okay? So let's say you have a 15-round magazine and you shoot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. Okay? Later on, the investigation comes, and for whatever reason, you decide you want to talk to the cops. Okay? And then you told them, hey, I shot 5 rounds, when in fact you shot 6, right? Yeah. But you also tampered with the evidence, right? And then let's say there's a round missing from that magazine. They're like, well, where's the round at? You know what I mean? So just don't do it. We'll cover a little bit more later, but we just want to talk about the definitions. Okay, verified instructor. We already covered that. I don't need to harp on that again. Large capacity magazine means a feeding device that is designed to or readily converted to accept more than 15 rounds of ammunition for rifle and shotguns. A feeding device that holds more than 28 inches of shotgun shells. A feeding device that is capable of accepting more than 8 shotgun shells when combined with a fixed magazine. Okay, so yes, there is a provision in the Colorado revised statutes that say, you're not supposed to have these firearms. Now, if you owned it prior to 2013, which is when the law enacted, it's grandfathered.
Well, coming in from different states.
See, that's the other thing. And I'm going to get into that. So you're coming in from another state, that I think is a gray area.
Right.
Because, and this is largely why the law isn't enforced. It is on the onus. The onus is on the government, the state government, to prove that you didn't have that before 2013. Okay? Yeah. All right. So when we get into don't talk to the cops, right? If you get in trouble for whatever reason, you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to legal counsel, and you should exercise those rights. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay. Use and possession. All right. Use of physical force. So now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of why somebody would want their Colorado concealed carry, or any concealed carry for that matter. And this is very important to understand. Like I said, to keep you out of trouble when you're going to defend yourself. When you mentally think somebody is an imminent threat, can I use deadly physical force to protect myself and my daughter or third party? Or is it just physical force I can use, right? You know what I mean? And then what's weird is that there's a point in time, let's say there's an altercation. There's a point in time where things shift dramatically. At one point, you're using physical force to defend yourself. You're avoiding the situation, but they keep coming. And then it could potentially turn into this, okay, now I can use deadly physical force thing. And you have to be really on your toes to understand what those are, right? Right. So let's get into the law here. Okay. And then notice the highlighted portions of the law. Now, I literally copied and pasted this from the Colorado revised statute and highlighted Every subjective term that's in the law, right? And I want you to understand how subjective this stuff really is. A person is justified, okay, in using physical force upon another person to defend himself or a third person for what he reasonably believes to be the use of an imminent use of unlawful physical force by that other person, and he may use a degree of force which he reasonably believes to be necessary for that person's purpose. All right. How many subjective? It's super subjective. It's like, what's reasonable? What's imminent? Right? What is let's say the word justified? What is justified? Right? There's super subjectiveness in these laws when it comes to self-defense because it's such a very contentious topic, right? No one, I mean, at least for myself, I don't want to hurt anybody. But if somebody comes to me, right, and they're threatening my life, or I reasonably believe, right, as they put it in the law, that they're going to harm me or a third person in a serious bodily injury, remember that term, manner, then I can use deadly physical force, but this is talking about physical force. The next one is deadly physical force. All right, so the use of deadly physical force. Deadly physical force may be used only if a person reasonably believes, again, a lesser degree of force is inadequate. Now, we are not a duty to retreat state, which means we can stand our ground where we stand, and if somebody comes at us, we don't have to retreat to another part of the room or whatever, or anything like that. However, if there's a degree of force that we can use to stop the threat from being a threat, then we should probably do that, if that makes sense. It could be maybe it's a chair, or maybe it's running away, or maybe it's like, don't do anything, just close your doors on your car and don't do anything kind of thing, or inch forward, whatever that is. If there's a lesser degree of force that is inadequate, then now we can go into the deadly physical force aspect. Okay, the actor has reasonable ground to believe, and does in fact believe that he or another person is in imminent danger of being killed or receiving great bodily injury. Now, I don't know why they put great bodily injury. I think it's one and the same when it's talking about great bodily injury and serious bodily injury. So if you remember back when we were talking about the definitions of serious bodily injury, that's what this kind of means, okay? The other person is using or reasonably appears about to use physical force against the occupant of a dwelling, remember the dwelling? Yes. Or business establishment while committing or attempting to commit burglary as defined in these two laws. Now, we're not going to go over these two laws here, the 18.4202 and 18.4204. So that means there's more reading that you need to probably go do just to understand what burglary is in accordance with Colorado. Okay. The other person is committing or appears to about to commit kidnapping, robbery, or sexual assault. So we have to, and then they're defined in the law too, right? Kidnapping, sexual assault, so all that stuff is defined in the law as well. But we have to be careful, especially with the day of social experiments. Let's just put. So there's one social experiment in New York that was happening. There was a guy. So somebody was filming this. There was a kid walking along the sidewalk, and a guy comes up and grabs her and takes her into a dark alley. Now, if I was to see that, I would like to think that would go. That didn't look right. The first thing I'd do is call 911, right? And then the second thing I would do, because it looked like it was imminency, I would probably, I mean, this is New York, so I probably wouldn't have a firearm on me because their laws are stupid. But if I had a firearm on me, I would probably go and investigate because me personally, I have a tender heart when it comes to like children and females, and then they should be protected at all costs, kind of thing. But let's say I went in there, let's say I went in a dark alley and popped this guy, thinking that he was a kidnapper, when in fact it might have been her father or brother or something like that. And it was a social experiment. So in that case, do you think the courts, and it also just depends on where the jurisdiction is. In New York, probably I'd be prosecuted, right? But do you think I would have a reasonable belief that someone was an imminent threat?
For me, if I would see that type of stuff, I would probably think that way too.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
it's not like, no.
Exactly. You don't know. And that's my thing, is that you see that, you think it's imminent, but it's a social experiment. So we have to be really, really careful with this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But again, the law, this says, if you reasonably believe yourself or somebody else is in imminent danger, right? Or an imminent threat, right? So, and I think kidnapping and sexual assault, all that stuff, that happens too. And when it comes to sexual assault, there's some weird people out there, they have to do things like in public, and it's like, wait a minute, I don't know if I should do anything about this, but definitely be careful when you're defending a third party, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. And I do believe we should defend each other, but there's some things out there that might look like something face value, but it's something completely different. All right. Use of force in your home, basically, and I love this law because it basically gives it's the power to the homeowner or the occupant of the home to do what is necessary to protect their home and the people inside them. Okay. So, an occupant of a dwelling, remember we're talking about dwelling, is justified in using any degree of physical force, okay, including deadly physical force against another person when that other person has made unlawful entry into the dwelling, and when the occupant has reasonable belief, remember that word, reasonable belief, that such person has committed a crime in the dwelling in addition to the uninvited entry, or is committing or intends to commit, okay, a crime against a person or property in addition to the uninvited entry. And when the occupant reasonably believes that such other person might use any physical force, no matter how slight, against an occupant. Now, any occupant of a dwelling using physical force, to include deadly physical force, shall be immune from criminal and civil liability. So if you're in your home and somebody is uninvited in your home, you can use any degree of force to include deadly physical force, and the lawyers cannot come after you. You cannot be prosecuted. Okay? Doesn't matter why they're there. If they're uninvited and they're in your home, you can do what is necessary. Now, my personal take on it, if there's a chance, so you don't get into legal trouble, maybe even mental kind of things, right? Me personally, if I had to harm someone to defend myself, I would definitely seek counseling afterwards, regardless of whether I'm in my home or not. Okay, so to avoid all that stuff, I would likely give them an out. I would say, like, it depends on the situation, of course. But let's say I was home and I was upstairs, somebody's in the house, like, hey, you're in my house, get out now, I'm calling the cops, and if I see you, I'm going to assume that you're an imminent threat, and then I'm going to take care of business as I see fit. Does it make sense? So that's, I love that you're immune, and then the shall be immune. That is a de facto, like, they cannot do it. It's not may, it's shall, right? There's a very big difference when it comes to the law on those two terms. Okay? All right, use of force of premises and property. These are very, very similar. Basically, here's the deal. You cannot use deadly physical force to protect property or premises. You can't do it. You can use a degree of physical force to remove them, right? But then again, you're going to come into, you could open yourself up to civil prosecution, if that makes sense. So if somebody's on my property, let's say outside of my home, right? Outside of my home. And I want them to leave, but they don't leave, and I go out there and I physically remove them, I could potentially be opening myself up to civil liability. The best thing is just to call the cops and just report, right? Now, in the event becomes an imminent danger, now it switches to that you can use deadly physical force. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so if it's not imminent, then if it's not imminent for serious bodily injury, then you cannot use deadly physical force to take care of the situation. All right, dangerous weapons is basically talking about, in layman's terms, it's going to be your suppressors, your short barrel rifles, your short barrel shotguns that are regulated federally. So if you wanted a short barrel rifle or shotgun, or you wanted a suppressor currently today, and there's some legislation going around up in Congress about whether those should be removed from the National Firearms Act or not. That's another conversation. But right now, currently today, if they're regulated federally, then those are considered dangerous weapons, basically, right? So if you have like I registered a short-barreled rifle, and I paid the $200 tax stamp, and I have a short-barreled rifle and all that kind of stuff. But that's considered a deadly weapon. But Colorado law basically says if you have the permission from the federal government to have it, then you can have it in the state. Other states, I think California, they don't even allow that at all, right? Hawaii doesn't even allow that at all, right? And anyway, there's some legislation coming down the pipe to maybe change that. Okay. So a person commits a class 1 misdemeanor if he knowingly and unlawfully aims a firearm at another person. Now, I think I could see an argument where if you point a firearm at another person, you can be using deadly physical force, right? So I could see that argument from a prosecution standpoint, because why else would you point a firearm at somebody? You see what I'm saying? So I wouldn't pull it unless I knew it was an imminent threat. Or recklessly or criminal negligent discharge of a firearm. Okay, so recklessly would be like, let's say you're in, wherever you are, and you just fire it up into the air for no reason whatsoever. That could be considered reckless. Knowingly sets a loaded gun as a trap. So don't set any guns as a trap and leave it unattended, okay? So, this is probably stemming from maybe the past. Maybe somebody did that before, and they're like, oh, we got to put this in law now. All right. The person has in his or her possession a firearm while the person is under the influence of intoxicating liquor or a controlled substance. Okay. So you're not supposed to have a firearm in your possession if you are intoxicated. Okay. I mean, that's pretty standard stuff. That is a class 1 misdemeanor, which means the highest level of misdemeanor, and then the next level would go into felony. Okay. All right, here's one. Any person who knowingly or recklessly discharges a firearm into any dwelling or any other building or occupied structure or into any motor vehicle occupied by a person commits an offense of illegal discharge of a firearm. Now, there's a carve out there for law enforcement also. If you do this, and you're not a law enforcement officer in your official duties, then it's a class 5 felony. Okay, so that's the lowest. I think it's the lowest. It's either class 5 or class 6, but it goes from low. It goes from like the numerically the lowest or the highest to the lowest. So in the lowest number, let's say class 1 felony, that would be your highest felony. The hierarchy there. This one, I had a customer who had an accidental discharge. He had a malfunction in his AR-15 that we didn't cover because it's very rare, and he didn't know how to fix it. And he tried to fix it in his closet of all places. There's no windows or anything like that. Okay, so it discharged. All right. He says he didn't pull the trigger. I have to take him at his word. So there has to be something wrong with the firearm or the ammunition, right? He gets charged with this class 5 felony because it goes through his wall, ricochets off of his garage, and then hits his neighbor's house. Okay? Now, notice it says knowingly or recklessly. Now, in that scenario that I just described to you, do you think he was knowing or reckless? Or was it just a fluke accident? And he was still charged with the felony. Now, in that jurisdiction, he was charged with it. Prosecution charged him with it. And I submitted some letters to his lawyers about, there are several different ways a firearm could actually discharge without pulling the trigger. Plus, he was in his closet, and plus it ricocheted off of his garage roof. So there's no way that he would knowingly or recklessly discharge the firearm into a dwelling, right? So that's my argument. There's zero chance that would happen. I went and testified on his behalf. It got reduced to a class 1 misdemeanor, which is similar to this. I think we'll cover it in a minute. But then, the judge gave him 2 years of unsupervised probation, which means he just doesn't need to get in trouble with the law, which tells me that the prosecution wasted time, money, and effort to prosecute somebody who had a firearm and had an accidental discharge. Now, it was a serious charge, of course. Because if that projectile would have hit a person, now it could have been involuntary manslaughter or something of that nature, right? So it's very. You definitely need to make sure it's pointing in a safe direction, which he thought it was. We'll cover that later. Okay, Colorado concealed handgun permit. Here's your application stuff, right? You're not convicted of any court things, and they're gonna do a background check on you. So, application with CSP. Have you gone to the Sheriff's Department's website yet? Okay, so we're gonna go. You go here. You go here to services. So the handgun permit, you're going to apply from this page. There's going to be a button to apply somewhere. Okay. Yeah. And then once you apply, there it is right here. Once you apply, they're going to ask you, hey, do you have a concealed handgun safety course in accordance with 1812-202? You say yes, because that's what this is. Now, I didn't sign this or anything like that. We're going to put this out later. And then they're going to say, they're going to ask you some questions to make sure that you're not wasting their time or your time. Okay? And then you'll go in, make sure you take everything, make sure you go in on time. Like I said, they're backlogged, so make sure you get all that stuff done on time. That's pretty much it. All right, so fill out the application, but do not sign the application because they have to witness you sign the application. So fill out all the information, but don't sign the application. Wait till you go into your appointment And then when you're there at your appointment, they'll have you sign. Cool. You make your appointment. Actually, I think you get a call to make your appointment. Carrying restrictions. Okay. Basically, what I want to point out here is that a police officer, peace officer, law enforcement officer, whatever you want to call them, they can temporarily disarm you, with or without your concealed carry. If they need to temporarily disarm you, just let them do it. Don't fight them. Just let them do it. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't say, I would rather you grab my firearm with 2 fingers from the handle to prevent any kind of accidental discharge into my leg, right? You can request things like that, of course. So in Florida, there was a guy here recently. He was carrying. He was in his vehicle. The cop's like, "Hey, are you carrying?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm carrying." They're like, "Hey, can you step out?" He was compliant, completely compliant. They would go to disarm him. I don't know why, because he was completely compliant. But anyway, they go to disarm him. The lady, she's right-handed. She tries to grab the gun with the left hand, which is on his right hip. And because of her dexterity, she pulls the trigger and hits him in the leg. Yeah. So my suggestion is, if a law enforcement ever wants to disarm you, you just say, okay, you can disarm me. It's right here. Don't reach for it, of course. You can say, hey, it's on my right hip. I would prefer if you grab it with just 2 fingers, or be very, very, very judicial about the way you handle it, so I don't get shot. You know, yeah, you can request things like that, but don't resist. Okay. A building like this building, I don't know why they would, and they don't. But let's say Pike Creek Gun Club decided one day that they didn't want anybody carrying inside of this area. They can put a sign up, and then you're not supposed to carry in that area. All right. Now, whether you do or don't, that is on you. You would be breaking the law in that case. But there's some things, like I said, if you have to use your firearm for whatever reason for self-defense, it's always best to invoke your right to remain silent and to counsel immediately, and just don't say anything, right? And let the lawyers know. Yeah, basically just about any property can say, hey, we don't want firearms on this property. The DMV, of all places, is kind of a weird one, because it says the practice of open carrying is prohibited. But that doesn't say anything about concealed carry. You see what I'm saying? So that's kind of a weird sign, but it's there. Okay, so here's some things that our great people up in the Denver area decided to put in the law. I'm rolling my eyes, by the way. All right, 1812-214, 3.5. The Colorado General Assembly has imposed even more places that you cannot carry unless you are there for official business as a peace officer, and those places are listed below. Okay, a licensed child care center, public or private schools and colleges, government buildings, polling location drop boxes, places where security personnel or electronic weapons screening devices are permanently in place, places where security personnel electronically screen each person who enters the building to determine whether the person is carrying any weapon of any kind. Okay, CHP holders may leave their handgun in a locked vehicle in accordance with 1812-114.5, which we'll get into later, and 1812-105.5. And the CHP holders may carry a concealed handgun in the adjacent parking lot. Okay. Now, when it comes to, I didn't put this in here because I was a little confused on the law too. When it comes to colleges, there is a carve out for CHP holders that they can carry on college campuses. Okay, so I need to put that in here, but there is one in the law. I read it the other day, and I was like, it says it plain as day right there. So, but that doesn't mean things don't change at a blink of an eye. So, just stay up to date on your laws. All right. All right. A person shall not knowingly and unlawfully and without legal authority bring or have in a person's possession a deadly weapon as defined in 18191. And we're talking about deadly weapon being like those federal regulated firearms and stuff like that. On the real estate and all improvements erected thereon of any public or private elementary, middle, junior high, high school, vocational school, so on and so forth. Now, it shall not be an offense under the section if the weapon is unloaded and remains inside the motor vehicle, which we're going to cover storage laws a little bit. The person is in that is on that person's own dwelling or premises. Okay, the person is in private automobile. All right. The person at the time of carrying a concealed weapon held a valid written permit to carry a concealed weapon. Okay. The weapon involved was a handgun, and the person held a valid permit to carry a concealed handgun. Obviously, peace officers and or an educational program, like an approved educational program in that school. You want to take a break? There's coffee in there. You want some coffee right now? You good? All right. Cool. Hey, for those of you who are watching, if you have any questions or anything of that nature, just send them over the chat. I'll get to them when I can. All right, transportation. This law in the Colorado revised statute basically says that there is nowhere in the state that you are prohibited from transporting a firearm. And like Denver, they can't make a law that says that you cannot transport a firearm through Denver County and City. They can't make that one. So with or without a concealed carry permit, you can have a loaded firearm in your vehicle. Pistol, loaded pistol, I'm going to be specific on this. You can have a loaded pistol in your vehicle, and that's not considered concealed carry. Does it make sense? Yeah. So you can just ride around with your loaded firearm in your vehicle or on your person. Now, the moment let's say you go to Denver, or anywhere for that matter, the moment you step out of your vehicle and have a firearm on you, now you're outside of your vehicle and they can impose other things on you. For example, in Denver, you can't open carry in Denver, even though this is an open carry state. You can conceal carry in Denver, but you can't open carry. Okay? So, this is just a law that people need to know, because they're not going to enact any laws in other municipalities that say you can't transport a firearm. Now, of note, you cannot have a loaded rifle or shotgun in your vehicle. Okay? All right. Purchase and ownership. This is basically talking about. You ever heard of straw purchases? Okay, so straw purchase is this. I know you're a felon, but you ask me, because I'm not, to buy a firearm and then give it to you. That's a straw purchase. That's basically what it's talking about. If you're caught in doing that, if anybody's caught in doing that, it's class 4 felon. Okay? So don't do it. Hey, it's like buying cigarettes for kids, right? Don't buy cigarettes or alcohol for kids. Right? All right. Purchase and ownership. This is talking about licensed FFLs. Okay, we don't really need to go through this. Basically, the licensed gun dealer has to do certain things that it doesn't really matter to us as long as they do them. No big deal. Okay. All right. They're saying here in Colorado, you have to wait 3 days. So you're gonna go to an FFL. You're gonna say, I want to buy that gun. They're going to go, okay, cool. They're going to do all their paperwork. They put the serial number on the 4473. They're going to do all that stuff. they're going to send that off to Colorado Bureau of Investigation. They're going to do all their background check, all that stuff. Background check comes back as you're good. From that point forward, 3 days. Make sense? Okay. As soon as they say you're good, then you guys have to wait 3 days, right? So let's say you did it today. Today's Friday. It came back today. Then Saturday, Sunday, you can pick it up on like Monday afternoon. Okay. All right, child safety, storage and child safety, okay? These are pretty important to understand. You have a daughter, a single father, okay? So there's going to be some extra things that you should purchase in order to keep the firearm away from your 3-year-old daughter, especially as she gets older.
Right.
And typically speaking, males are more curious than females, but that's not to say that maybe she looks up to you and you go to the range and she sees you with it and she gets curious, right? So there's things that you should buy in addition to understanding your firearm intimately. We'll cover some of that when we get into actually storage devices. All right. It is unlawful for a person who has not attained the age of 18 years knowingly to have a handgun in such a person's possession. Illegal possession of a handgun is a juvenile, as a class 2 misdemeanor. For any second or subsequent offense, illegal possession of a handgun of a juvenile is a class 5 felony. So they're giving us some leniency there because the class 2 misdemeanor. I mean, it still sucks to have a misdemeanor on the record, but that's pretty serious. I mean, a juvenile having a handgun, I think, is a pretty serious thing, especially if they're unsupervised. So there are some exceptions here, right? So if the juvenile is in a firearm safety course, okay? If they're target shooting, like right here on the range, right? They're shooting shotguns out there. A couple weeks back, man, this place was full of teenagers shooting shotguns, man. It was great. I loved it, right? Because they were in that shooting competition, shooting events, so on and so forth. And they had their parents here. Yeah. It was great. Okay. Engaging in organized competition, hunting or trapping, traveling with a handgun in such person's possession, being unloaded to and from an activity. Okay? All right. Now, this is important, right? Because let's say your daughter's going to grow. Let's say she's 12, 15. She's mature. You trust her, kind of thing. You've done your personal risk assessment, okay, of your daughter, okay, who is on real property under the control of such person's parent and who has the permission of such person's parent to possess a handgun. So that tells me if I had a child and I wanted the child to have the handgun on my property for self-defense purposes, yes, I can do that. Now, like I said, I have to make that risk assessment on whether the child is mature enough to actually have the firearm on their hip or in possession thereof. Okay? Does that make sense? Who is in such person's resident and who, with the permission of such person's parent or legal guardian, possesses a handgun for the purposes of exercising the rights obtained in 18174 or section 18174.5, and that's talking about your self-defense clauses, that using deadly physical force and self-defense within the home. Okay, so again, each person has to make they have to do a risk assessment, an internal risk assessment on their child, because if they have the permission, if the child gets the permission from the parent, and the child goes and does something nefarious with that firearm, you bet your bottom dollar that they're going to be coming after the parent. Okay, so you have to do your due diligence to train the child, understand the child, and to make sure they understand all the firearm safety functions and when to use the firearm. Okay. Yeah. All right. Enough on that. Lost and stolen firearms. Basically, it's saying once you know that you have lost or your firearm was stolen, you have 5 days to report that. Okay? You have 5 days from the time you started knowing. You have 5 days. Which to me, whenever I call a law enforcement officer, that's when I find out. I'm just saying. That's when I found out. I just realized, right? For those of us who have an arsenal, let's say, it's not hard to go. Where's that one at? You know what I mean? Because especially if you like me, like I have firearms placed in strategic places throughout my house, locked away from children, all that stuff. And then but then I bring those firearms to the range. And then I get home, and then things happen. And then it's like, well, did I put that back where it's supposed to go, or did I keep it in that box, or you know what I mean? These kinds of things, right? So it's not super hard. And then, you know, if something was stolen, for example, and you didn't realize it, let's say from your vehicle, you're in a rush, and then one day you go to look for it and it's not there. You're like, oh, well, okay, hey, this thing. So the implied task here is have a list of firearms by serial number, make and model, a list of what you own in your safe or somewhere in safekeeping. Because if something does go missing, they're going to want to know those things: serial number, make and model. Okay. If you can't provide and proof of purchase, if you can't provide those things, they will likely not even care about it, especially the serial number. Okay? And if you can't provide proof of purchase, even if they did find it, they might not even return it to you. Yeah. So have a list of firearms that you have: serial, make, model, serial number, make, and model, proof of purchase. Okay? Then if you fail to report within 5 days, they're going to impose a $25 fine. Any subsequent offense to be $500 fine. I don't know how they get these numbers. It didn't make any sense. Yeah, I don't know. So, for those of us who maybe not be on our toes, let's say, and they're like, oh, man, that was 10 days ago. Well, I'm not even reported, right? Because they don't want to get a silver infraction when they should actually report it. Okay. Okay, a person shall not knowingly leave a handgun in an unattended vehicle unless a handgun is locked in a hard-sided container that is placed out of view, including a locked container that is permanently affixed to the vehicle's interior. A locked vehicle or the locked trunk of a locked vehicle. Now, a locked glove box or glove compartment or the locked center console of the vehicle is a locked hard-sided container, but you need to be able to lock it. Okay? If you can't lock it, then you're going to need to purchase a box, an opaque box that locks. Okay? Unlawfully storing a firearm in a vehicle is a civil infraction, so this isn't a misdemeanor or anything like that. This is just, I think this law, the intent of this law, I believe, is to just get more people to lock their firearms up. Stolen firearms from vehicles is a very, very big problem here in Colorado. It's huge, right? So, if you can take your firearm from your vehicle, let's say into your house, then do so. But where this becomes a problem is, let's say you have to leave the firearm in your vehicle because you're going to a place where you're not supposed to have a firearm. Courthouse, somebody has a sign up, something like that. And people want to abide by the law, so then they just leave it in their vehicle. Window gets broken, whatever, then the firearm gets yanked, right? So just be very aware of that. Storage of child safety, home and dwellings. Okay, so this is pretty interesting language. A person commits unlawful storage of a firearm when the person fails to reasonably and securely store a firearm as described upon any premises that the person owns or controls the person and controls and the person knows or reasonably should know that a juvenile can gain access to the firearm without the parent's permission. Okay? A resident of the prison premises is ineligible to possess a firearm pursuant to the state or federal law. So we're talking about federal, we're talking about felonies, of course, persons with felonies. We're talking about those who have an ERPO, which we'll get into in a minute, the emergency, whatever it is, the emergency protective order. We're talking about those who have been convicted of a domestic violence against a lover, for lack of a better term, even if it was a misdemeanor, because they're not supposed to have a firearm for 5 years. We'll cover that in a minute when it comes to federal law. We're talking about those kinds of persons, but we're also talking about juveniles, of course. But this whole without goes back to the other law, right? So I had a 16-year-old son. Well, he'll be 21 in March. We built a firearm. We built an AR-15, and he had the AR-15 on his wall. He had a magazine close by. It wasn't in the firearm, but it's close by. He had full access to it. And like I said before, I did my own personal risk assessment of my child because I took him to the range. I've seen him handle the firearm. I understand his mentality. I get all that. Now, did I take a risk? Yeah, I took a risk, of course, right? But I took that internal risk and I said, okay, I 100% believe that my son wouldn't do anything nefarious, and I need him to have access to this in the event that we have to defend our home against intruders, let's say, okay? So I was within the law on that, but again, I did my own personal risk assessment. Okay, child storage devices, okay? We need to have a lockable. There needs to be ease of access for authorized persons. You need to be able to permanently fix it to an immovable object. That's optional, but it's recommended. It should be durable and it should have a robust retention, right? What do you think about this guy? No, not a fan at all. Not a fan at all. So these stupid devices right here, these are the cheapest way that firearm manufacturers could stay in line with the law because they have to provide a lock for a gun. The cheapest way. It's the dumbest thing ever. I hate it. That along with the cable that goes through the barrel and all that stuff, that's dumb too. Anyway, it wouldn't be suitable for a vehicle storage anyway. Okay? Because remember, you have to have a lockable container, right? What about this guy? Is this any better? Now I have to say it's a little bit better because you don't have to have a key, but then you have to worry about a battery and all that stuff. So, anyway, again, not suitable for vehicle storage. All right, so we're not going to go. I'm not going to bore you with my video here. I'm going to redo it anyway because that was a little while ago. I was just starting this thing, so I got to redo it with better audio, better video, all this stuff. But a box, see this orange box right here? I'll use my cursor here. See that orange box? You'll see that orange box later on today. That's robust, but it's for multiple firearms. Yeah. Right? Yeah. I have another box. I think you got this one right here. You see that silver guy right here? That's where the key goes. Okay? It's one key, and it basically locks it all. It locks it down pretty good. But I don't use it for home storage. I use it for vehicle storage. I use it for air travel. We'll get air travel too. The other box I have, which you can't really see, is off screen, is a key code. And I use key codes because let's say you came over, and let's say I trust you, and you're going to stay, a week or whatever. I want you to have access to the firearm. So I can just give you the code. Make sense?
Yeah.
Now when it comes to biometrics, if I'm doing biometric stuff, there's a memory there. And I want to have my right hand, my left hand. I want to have my wife's right hand and left hand. Now we're starting to get to the limit of the memory, right? So if I have, let's say I have my brother-in-law over, can I add him to that? And then how many lock boxes do I have, right? Kind of thing. So don't want to go around and program his hand in there, right? So in my personal opinion, I think that numbered key codes are better than biometrics and way better than keys. Way better than keys, especially for access. All right, let's take a little break. All right, guys, we're going to take a break. We'll be back in a minute. The bathroom is through here. Hey guys, we're just taking a break real quick. So we've covered a lot so far. If you're in Colorado and you want your Colorado concealed handgun permit, you can contact me at david@AAAcoach.com, or you can do 719-654-2506. You can also just sign up on whatever concealed carry day we have, okay? Go to AAAcoach.com, you'll be able to see that on there. There'll be some links there. So we're just taking a break. My customers will be back here momentarily.
I was surprised at all these laws before I moved here. I
Yeah.
moved here like 3 weeks ago, actually.
Yeah.
I'm from Iowa. Iowa is constitutional carries.
Yeah.
I didn't have no problem with it, carrying my firearms around.
Yep.
Here is a different ballgame for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, different ballgame. Now you can open carry in Colorado.
Yeah.
So you're not completely limited.
At the same time, all eyes on you.
See, yeah, that's true. But I mean, it's either all eyes on you or you don't have that equalizer. Now there are some things that you have to think about when you open carry, though. Obviously retention being a big thing.
Yeah.
Understanding, like, I think you have to be a little bit more situation aware than what you normally probably would be, because you don't want some nefarious person trying to grab a firearm, kind of thing. So we'll get into that. I'm 100% not opposed to open carry. I think you should exercise your Second Amendment right, whether it's open carry or concealed carry, period. And I do think that concealed carry should be constitutional throughout the nation. But there are some people out there that you go to the range, you're like, buddy, I don't think you should be having a firearm.
Yeah.
But it is what it is, right? we're kind of like in this like in between thing. I think what's going on, but let's get into these extreme risk protective orders. So the extreme risk protective order, I have a love-hate relationship with it because the intent, I believe, is good intent. It's good intention, but I can see how it can be abused. In fact, I am a victim of it being abused from California. My ex-wife made some very untruthful, heinous claims, and I had to give them the firearms for a short stint. But that is a conversation that we can have later. But basically, she abused the system, and because the law was there, and she's very smart. I give credit where credit's due. She's very smart. She used the law against me to get what she wanted. So, yes. Yeah, pretty bad. Now, I'm not saying that's not all the time, right? There are definitely some cases out there. There's domestic violence for sure. There's sexual abuse for sure. There are cases where the extreme risk protective order should be used, but I hate to think that somebody's out there abusing that law. Okay, so community member. Now I want you to notice how many people can actually file an extreme risk protective order against you, right? Not just spouses, right? So pay attention to this. This is serious. A community member means a licensed healthcare professional or health or mental health professional who, through direct professional relationship, provided care to the respondent or the respondent's child within 6 months before requesting the protection order, or an educator who, through direct professional relationship, interacted with the respondent or the respondent's child within 6 months before requesting the protection order. So, that in itself, a healthcare professional or an educator who has a professional relationship with you or your child. Now, that could heavily be abused by somebody who is anti-gun. If they find out that you have firearms or all that stuff, right? So be careful of who you talk to about firearms in that kind of manner, if that makes sense, right? So just be careful on that one. An educator means that a teacher employed to instruct students or a school administrator in a school district, private school, charter school, institute, or individual charter school, or a faculty member at an institution of higher education. A faculty member means a president, dean, professor, administrator, instructor, or any research worker at an institution of higher education. So basically, everyone but the janitor, right? can file an ERPO. Now, I did a little bit of research on this. Typically, those who are not law enforcement officers, they're less likely to get approved by the judge. But if a law enforcement officer files one, it's more likely to get approved by the judge. Right. So I did a little bit of research. Now, that's not to say that it won't change, right? Right. Depending on who's doing what. But all right, here's a family or household member. A person related by blood, marriage, or adoption to the respondent. A person who has a child in common with the respondent, regardless whether such person has been married to the respondent or has lived together with the respondent at any time. Now, I don't know your particular situation. You're a single father, so you can just deduce what you need to do there, okay? Person who has regularly resided with the respondent within the last 6 months. A domestic partner of the respondent. A person who is a biological or legal parent-child relationship with the respondent, including step-parents and step-children and grandparents and grandchildren. A person who is acting or has acted to the respondent's legal guardian. A person that falls in the intimate relationship definition, which means a relationship between spouses, former spouses, past and present, unmarried couples. Persons who are both the parents of the same child, regardless of whether the person has been married or have lived together at any the time. So, there's a lot of people here. Any of the following can request a extreme risk protection order against you, a healthcare professional, mental health professional, a school or a teacher or school administrator, a president, dean, professor, administrator, instructor, or research worker in a college or university, law enforcement officer, a spouse, former spouse, relative, or other parent, past or present lovers. Right. So there's a lot of people. I think most of that has to be within 6 months. Okay, so if you had, for example, some kind of medical thing, and 6 months have passed, that doctor who you saw couldn't petition the court, right? Yeah. Same thing, I think, for law enforcement officers. I'm not sure what the statute of limitations there are, but that might be something to think about. If the court finds it to be a legitimate claim, the court shall issue a temporary extreme risk protection order. They have to notify the respondent within the day of or the immediate day after. They have to schedule a hearing within 14 business days. The respondent has to surrender all firearms. The law enforcement officer shall serve the respondent. And at that time, they're supposed to take possession of the firearms, even if you decide that you want to sell it to an FFL. Okay? If law enforcement officers take possession of the firearms, they shall issue a receipt of all firearms taken. If that was to happen, you absolutely need to verify every single serial number, make, and model. I mean, me personally, if it was me, I would tell a law enforcement officer, like, I want to go down this receipt. I'm not going to take your word for it. I want to see every single last one of them to make sure that you got the right number again, right? Because if it's the wrong number, even by like one, let's say the serial number, let's say on the paper it says 1, 2, 3, 4 is a serial number, and you go back to retrieve it, and they go try to find serial number 1, 2, 3, 4. They're not going to find serial number 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's their excuse not to give it back to you. Okay. Any firearms that were surrendered to law enforcement personnel must be returned after the background investigation and confirmed that the order is no longer valid. Unclaimed firearms in law enforcement possession may be disposed of after 1 year of the expiration order. So let's say they said, okay, let's say today, they're like, all right, extreme risk protection order, valid, here it is. 1 year from now, the judge is going to reevaluate, let's call it. And then let's say the judge is like, okay, everything's good here. Now the order is no longer valid. Yeah. So now you have 1 year to claim your firearms from law enforcement officers from that day. All right? Yep. All right, here's summary of the law, state laws. They're tricky. So even if you're a lawyer, they're still tricky, right? So it's best to avoid confrontation, secure your firearm, keep your firearm from unauthorized persons, attempt to de-escalate any situation that may arise, okay? And if required and lawful, use a reasonable amount of force to prevent further harm. Call 911 early if you witness one of the criminal acts that have been defined in the Colorado revised statutes. We talk about that, sexual battery or anything like that. Call 911 first, right? Right. And if it becomes an imminent threat, then you make your determination what you're going to do. Okay. And further study may be required to fully understand the laws presented in this course. Okay. Now we're getting to federal law. So state law is pretty in depth, right? Federal law is kind of general kind of things. All right. So Title 18 U.S. Code Chapter 44 deals with general firearm federal laws. You can read any of those federal laws to your heart's content by just go searching 18 U.S. Code Chapter 44. The National Firearm Act of 1934, okay. This exercises the taxing power of the federal agencies, of the executive branch and all that stuff, to levy taxes for these particular firearms. We talked about them: short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, suppressors, and also machine guns, right? You can still possess a machine gun, but you have to go through a bunch of hoops. Yeah. So that's the NFA 34. Gun Control Act of 1968. Okay, so among other provisions of the GCA, they established minimum ages for firearms purchases. Now, federally, it's 18. Okay, the requirement that all firearms be affixed with a serial number. This is when the serial numbers came about, and the expansion of these categories to prohibited persons. Again, going on. Okay, so this is this is GCA 68. And this is what's called FOIPA, Firearms Owner Protection Act of 86. All right, it prevented the federal government from maintaining a central database of firearm dealer records. Now, just because there's not a central database doesn't mean there's not a database out there, because FFLs have to keep the records, I think, forever. Right. Even if they go out of business, I think they still have to keep the records, or they have to hand them over. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but that'd be something to talk about an FFL about. But there's still a record of it, even though they're not centralized. FOIPA also gives the peaceable journey law, right? Which basically says, let's say you're going to travel from here to, let's say, Pennsylvania, okay? And you have to go through Illinois. Illinois doesn't respect any other state's concealed carry. All right. In fact, you're supposed to have what's called a firearm owner identification card, or FOID card. So this is saying basically you can go through the state, but you'll have to lock the firearm up in a separate lockbox, keep the ammunition separate, go through the state without stopping. And I think what they mean by stopping is, you can get gas. But if you stop and stay the night in that state, that's not allowed, right? So you have to go straight through. Yeah. Okay. But again, it goes to that understand your rights, right? So I would never let law enforcement look in my vehicle with my permission. And if they're going to do it, I would say, I'm not going to interfere with your investigation, but I'm not giving you permission. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So this is Washington gun law. I watched Washington gun law, Attorneys on Retainer, Attorneys for Freedom, and Four Boxes Diner. I watch them pretty regularly. These are just lawyers talking lawyer stuff. Yeah. And it's better to hear it from them than from me. So let's listen to it.
It is the Firearm Owners Protection Act
Can you hear that?
of 1986, or it is sometimes referred to as FOIPA. Now, this was passed during the Reagan administration. It was meant to address some of the constitutional concerns that had come out of the Gun Control Act of 1968, despite the fact that there had been several pieces of litigation on that piece of legislation. There was still general concern that portions of that statute could, in fact, be unconstitutional. This statute, which actually granted gun rights back to individuals, passed under President Reagan, made it easier to transport long guns across state lines. It also allowed for shipping through a regular postal system, such as that. Registration for ammunition purchases on all ammunition. the states as they're doing interstate travel, which may otherwise have very restricted firearms, but allows individuals to travel through the states as long as the firearm is properly secured in their automobile, consistent with the safe passage provisions. Now, this legislation did not come without some criticism. If you look at the historical perspective of it, really in the 11th hour before this legislation was passed, there was a huge amendment offered by a Democratic Senator Hughes from New Jersey, which basically banned the manufacture and sale and possession of any automatic weapon to any civilian starting in 1986. The next piece of legislation is.
All right. Yeah, I suggest like watching that guy. He definitely goes over the laws pretty well, at least in my point of view. Okay, Bipartisan Safety Communities Act, it did a lot of things, right? But basically it prohibits a person convicted of a violent misdemeanor against a current or recent former dating partner from possessing firearms for 5 years. So even though it's a misdemeanor, they're still going to limit you if you're convicted in this capacity. This is basically, so this is the law that's a derivative of the FOIPA. Remember we talked about FOIPA? So the act then became law. This is the law. Federal and State 18 U.S. Code, paragraph 926 alpha. All right. Air travel. Super important. So if you're going to travel via air, a couple things. Know how to declare a firearm, and then know what I'm going to suggest some stuff as you're in travel, and then also your destination involved, right? Not only your destination, but any layovers you may have. So first things first. In order to travel safely without getting hemmed up or fined or anything like that, the firearm and the magazines unloaded, period.
Yeah.
Completely unloaded. They go in the lockbox.
Because they can separate it.
No. Well, your firearm and magazine, yeah, they need to be separated.
Different
So,
box.
no, not boxes. Same box,
Same box.
but out of the magazine, out of the firearm.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Firearm in the magazine, in the one lockbox. Firearm in. Same lockbox, empty magazine. Same lockbox, ammunition in its original packaging. Right? Lock it up. You can leave your ammunition in your check baggage without locking it up. But I just put it in the same lockbox.
Right.
Not a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just did this recently. So unload the firearm completely by clearing the chamber, emptying the magazine, all the ammunition in its original packaging. Everything can go in the same lockbox, separate in the lockbox, lock it up, go to the counter.
Do you have to declare it
Yep.
on the phone?
Nope. You get to the counter,
Okay.
like let's say you're the flight attendant, or receptionist.
Right.
I come up to you and say, hey, I got a firearm to declare. Like, okay. They're going to grab a piece of paper. They're going to start filling stuff out. They're going to hand you the piece of paper. Then they're going to have you put it on the box or in the box or whatever. Just follow their instruction.
Yeah.
You're going to zip up your check baggage, not your carry-on, check baggage. And in Denver, they escort you to where they're going to scan it. And then once the TSA agent's like, you're good to go, then you just go get on your plane. Okay? And then, so now you're in transit. Let's say you have, let's say you're going, for whatever reason, you have to go through LaGuardia to, I don't know, some other airport, but you have a layover. Let's say your flight's canceled and you're in LaGuardia, you're in New York, okay? And let's say that firearm is, let's say you have 15 round, like a 15 round capacity, right? You're within Colorado law, but not New York law.
Yeah.
Don't take possession of your bag. Because if you take possession of that bag, now you take possession of that firearm. And I think in New York, it's 10 rounds.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So this is me, this is what I would do. Okay? And I don't know if this is right, but I wouldn't touch that bag. I wouldn't even touch it. I would, even if it's like clothes and stuff in there that I need, I'd just go buy some clothes, right? Because if you take possession of that bag, now you take possession of the firearm.
Right.
And if you take possession of the firearm, and you're in New York, let's say, and they know you have a firearm, let's say, then they could potentially go, you're in possession of a firearm that's illegal in New York.
Okay.
Tracking?
Yeah. So
All right.
now,
So I would tell the airline, like, I have a firearm in that bag that is not legal in the state of New York. I'm not taking possession of it. We need to figure something out.
got it.
I'm not going to take possession of it. I don't know if law enforcement needs to take possession of it. I don't know if the airline needs to take possession of it and it stays here, because I'm going to get on a plane tomorrow, and that bag needs to get on the same plane with me, because I'm going to Florida, where the firearm is legal.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
But I wouldn't take possession of that bag. So if you're going to travel, understand those state laws. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. Not only the state you're leaving from, but the state you're going to, and any states you have a label.
Got it.
All right. So general handgun knowledge. We're going to go over safety rules, firearms retention, storage of firearm, care of a firearm, proper clearing and unloading. I think we already talked about storage of firearm, not a big deal. Okay, so the recent accidents happen: ignorance, carelessness, and arrogance. Okay, if you're just completely dumb to the idea about firearms and you go grab a firearm, and you could likely have an accident. That's where the training comes in, right? Carelessness. These could be, any one of these could be synonymous with each other, right? But carelessness, just a poor attitude, having, you've seen it probably on like YouTubes and TikToks and stuff, where like somebody's just blasting away at the range, right? That's super careless, and unwarranted. And arrogance, somebody who thinks they know everything about firearms all the time. They don't think, an accident would happen to them or not happen to them. They're just completely arrogant about it. Accidents do happen, and it happens to the best of us. So let's talk about safety rules. So the NRA they have their 3 safety rules, and it's always, always, always. But we're gonna kind of debunk that myth a little bit, because it can't be always, 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 and we're gonna cover that in a minute. All right. So always keep the gun pointed in a safe direction. Can you always keep the gun pointed in a safe direction? That's the question. They're saying do that, but can you?
Pointing out, let's say pointing out left, person comes to my left, I'm going,
Yeah. Okay. What about when you put it on your hip?
Yeah.
Is it pointing in the safe direction?
Pointing at the ground.
I mean, if you stand up and you put it at your hip, you're probably going to be pointing at your leg or knee or toes or something. What about those of us who appendix carry? It's like right here.
Oh, shoot.
Is it in safe direction? Exactly. So my point is, you can't always do that.
Yeah.
The due diligence is on you to try to keep it pointed in a safe direction. But there's some instances where you cannot.
Right.
When I pull out my orange box later with some firearms in it, and I put it on the table, if I just spin that thing around, you don't know which way the guns are pointing.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So you can't always do it. Okay? All right, next one. Always keep your finger off the trigger until ready to shoot. Okay, so this one you can always keep your finger off the trigger until ready to shoot. But there's two clauses here. What is until ready to shoot? What do you, to you, what is until ready to shoot?
From the range.
Okay, yeah, okay, good. Yeah, you're at the range. But even if you're at the range or not at the range, what is until ready to shoot?
Feels like danger coming.
I like that answer. Yeah, I like that answer.
Has a knife on their hand.
Okay, yeah. And a minute threat?
Like something you don't know, and then, you know.
Yeah, so perfect. I love that answer, right? What I like to say is, even when we're on the range and we're pointing at a target, I like to say that the target is a threat. It's an imminent threat, right? I have to put in my mind that my trigger finger will be off of the trigger until there's an imminent threat, and I'm pointed at that imminent threat. Now, there's a difference between pointing and aiming, okay? Aiming is pointing, but pointing is not necessarily aiming. Does that make sense? If I point at you like this, am I aiming? Aiming is taking and looking down the sights, right? But if I just point, I could potentially be aiming with my body, right, or my hand, right? But what I'm talking about aiming is like I'm looking down the sights, and then that's that, right? But I can shoot you from here, right?
Right.
So if you're an imminent threat, I recognize you're an imminent threat. I'm either pointing or aiming at you, and now my trigger finger goes on the trigger. Does it make sense?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense.
No. Keep your gun unloaded until ready to use. Again, this is a two-part clause, right? What does until ready to use mean?
Until you're ready to go out. I mean.
And wait, until you're ready to go out. Until you're ready to go out of your house.
Yeah.
Okay. I do like that answer. So you're thinking outside the box a little bit, which is great, right? So until ready to use. So I have hunting shotguns, I have hunting rifles, I have AR-15s, I have pistols. I have some pistols that I use for competition, I have other pistols that I use for everyday carry, all these things, right? So in my safe, my hunting rifles and shotguns are completely unloaded. They're only going to be loaded until I'm ready to use them for hunting. So I'm going to be in the woods ready to use them, right? Now, when I go out and about and have my everyday carry, well, it's going to be loaded in because it's ready to use, right? I'm in the environment where I would use it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In my home, I have my firearms in a lockbox loaded because they are ready to use. Does that make sense? All right, so we just need to, because a lot of people think they see that, and you didn't do this, which is great. A lot of people, they see that, keep the gun unloaded until ready to use it, is always keep the gun unloaded, even if it's on your hip. Right? Yeah, so a lot of people they look at that and they think about that, and they're like, oh, wait, keep the gun unloaded, so you have a full magazine over here and an empty gun over here, and it's just, if that's the way they want to carry, I'm not going to ridicule them for it, but it is not the preferred method. Then there's some more safety rules that we can go over, USCCA. Basically, they're about the same. But the two most important are keep your finger pointed in a safe direction, which you're supposed to diligently try to, even though you can't do it all the time, and then keep your finger off the trigger until ready to use, right? So, for example, if I go to holster, let's say I have a holster on me, and I go to holster, I have to keep that finger off the trigger because I don't want to shoot myself, right? So even though I violated keeping the gun pointing in a safe direction because I'm holstering, okay, I'm maintaining the other one by keeping my finger off the trigger. Make sense? Now, if I go to, let's say that's downrange, and I go like this, and I put my finger on the trigger. Now, I'm not necessarily ready to shoot yet, right? But I have an accidental discharge into the berm, but I was pointed in a safe direction. Again, I violated one, but I maintained the other. The ultimate goal is to maintain both of them, but sometimes you're going to violate that point in a safe direction because you have to holster. You have to holster here or put it in a bag or whatever you're going to do. It's going to be pointing somewhere that might not be a safe direction. Does that make sense? So, those two are the most important in my point of view. And there's additional safety rules right there. I just made those up randomly. Okay. If you are carrying, whether it's concealed or open, somebody may try to grab your firearm. So retention is super important. If you're concealed carrying, the retention of your holster needs to be that of such that it's not going to fall out of your holster, for example. Especially if it's going to be inside the waistband because you can tighten your belt up. But your clothing is also part of that retention, right? Because then somebody has to remove your clothing and then get your firearm, just like you do. Now, if you're going to open carry at all, you should have some kind of level 2 retention holster. So level 1 is just friction. Level 2, you have to defeat a mechanism, let's say a button or whatever, and then there's friction. And level 3 is you have to defeat 2 devices and then there's friction, right? Minimum on level 2 should be required when you're open carry. You don't have to, but that's something to protect you and your firearm, right? So ultimately, if you have a concealed carry permit, you should just conceal carry. Carry your firearm. Carry your firearm, basically, you take your firearm apart to clean it. You're going to clear it first. You're going to take it apart. You're going to look at the wear and tear on the metal. Where the wear and tear is on the metal, you'll be able to see the friction points on metal. That's where you need lube. Metal and metal contact is where you need lube. You don't need a lot of it either. You need very, very, very little of it on each one of those little parts. Obviously, you need to get all the shavings out of there, so brass shavings and lead and all that stuff. Yeah. But typically speaking, I don't clean my pistols for a good 1,000 rounds or more, right? And I just don't clean it all the time, right? So that's carry your firearm, not a big deal. It is important to clean out the barrel, but it's not super critical, like on a constant basis. Maybe every 6 months or whatever, but typically speaking, I don't really clean my pistols for a good while. I really don't. Right? In my point of view, firearms are meant to be dirty to a certain point, right? If they're completely clean all the time, then, well, 1, did you really train as much as you should have, and then 2, are they going to function correctly, right? All right, watch this guy. Remember the arrogance that we talked about earlier?
I have one on my side right here. Just this week, at the beginning of the week, a young boy, 16 years old, was killed because he was playing with a gun. And see, this is an unloaded gun. Right here. This is a Glock 4. Get said, too short, all enough to talk about Glock 4. Okay, I don't want to.
Sorry, it's funny, not funny, man. It's funny, not funny, because let's watch it again. Now, I'm going to explain something here.
Just this week, at the beginning of the
All right, so first we're talking about arrogance, right? So this guy is super arrogant. Secondly, he says this is a Glock 40. He means caliber. There is no such thing as Glock 40, right? There's Glock 23s, there's Glock 20, there's Glock 19s, Glock 17s. There's the nomenclature of a Glock 40 caliber, I believe, is Glock 23, something like that, right? But there's no Glock 40, quote unquote, right? So he's showing not only his arrogance, but also his ignorance in the firearm itself. So then he goes in.
16 years old was killed because he was praying with a gun. And see, this is an unknown gun.
This is an unknown gun. Pulls it. Now listen. So what he did is he racked the slide back, okay, and he locked it to the rear. And he has somebody off screen here, has somebody look at it, and that somebody's like, yeah, it's clear, right? What he failed to do was remove the source of feed, or the magazine. And so there's a loaded, there's a cartridge right there, ready to go. And then what does he do? Here. Maybe even for dramatic effect, I don't know. There's about 40.
50 cent, 2 shoulder.
Right there, he just chambered around. Right?
But talk about Glock 40. Okay, I'm the only one
He goes on. He was going to bring out an AR-15 out of this. The kids are like, no. Yeah. So, like I said, accidents happen. I don't know this man. I don't know how good he is with a firearm or anything like that. Maybe he's just nervous. I don't know. Whatever the case may be, he had a huge mistake, and he did live. And he just super embarrassed, and I think he was kicked off of the police force or whatever he was doing. But so now I'm going to clearing procedures. Okay. So this clearing procedure is what we use in the special operations community. In fact, we had to recite this verbatim in highly in high level schools of shooting, right? So we had to recite this verbatim. We were tested on it. And if we got it wrong, then we'd have to do something, I don't know, a counsel statement, or we'd have to do some push-ups or something like that, right? Some kind of punishment, right? And it was part of a robust test. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to attempt to put it on safe, right? Some firearms have an external safety, some do not. We need to get in our minds that we're going to attempt to put this thing on safe, whatever it is. So Glock doesn't have an external safety, your 1911s do. Some firearms, say the SIG, some even though they're the same model, one has its external safety, the other one does not. Again, we're just going to attempt to put on safe. Then we're going to remove the source of feed. In this case, for a pistol, is we're going to remove the magazine. From there, we're going to lock the action to the rear. When we lock the action to the rear, we may or may not have to put it back on fire. For example, in 1911, we'll have to put it back on fire, then lock it to the rear. So that might be an added step depending on the fire. After you lock it to the rear, if there's anything in the chamber, you're going to observe the extraction and the ejection of the cartridge, whether it's empty or full, okay? And then you're going to inspect 3 parts of the firearm: the chamber, the slide face, and the magazine well. Okay, chamber, slide face, magazine well. It could also be the bolt face, let's say of the AR-15, but I'm saying slide face for a pistol, right? Basically where the cartridge is going to sit in the firearm, right? The back of the cartridge. From there, once you know it's clear, you're going to point in a safe direction. On the range, it's going to be in the burn. At home, it might be a different location. I don't know. But you're going to dry fire. Why would we dry fire in a safe direction? What's that? True. Yeah. So there are a couple of different reasons. The first reason, when you hear that click, you know you've completed that cycle of clearing, right? You know for a fact you did everything correct. Okay. Secondly, if it's a single action firearm, that means the hammer was under spring tension. And if you store that away with your hammer under spring tension, the hammer can get weak over time, or the spring in the hammer. Okay. So if it's double action firearms, it doesn't really matter all that much when it comes to that portion. But again, if you want to close that cycle out, you point in a safe direction, could be the berm or something of that nature, and then you're gonna do a dry fire shot into the berm, right? And it just closes that psychologically. I think it just closes that out, and there's no way that it could ever happen. Now, you also do this in competitions like USPSA or IDPA or something like that. They actually have you dry fire into the berm before you holster. So, yep. So that's another reason to get your mind right. So if you ever want to do competitions, which I highly suggest you do, they're awesome, they're fun. People are generally, for the most part, are super welcoming, and there's not a shortage of people that will give you their opinion. Let me answer this real quick. Somebody asked a question. Thanks for showing this live. Question about CCW. I got my CCW already. Wife went to class and also range time to get hers. Does she need a gun or CCW first? Okay, to answer the question, either way, you can get your firearm or you can get your CCW first. It doesn't matter. Here in the state of Colorado, it's open carry. You can actually open carry a firearm. So if that's the only way you can exercise your Second Amendment rights, then by all means, open carry. Now, I suggest getting your concealed carry as fast as possible, and then concealed carry. But if the only way you can exercise your Second Amendment right legally is by open carrying, then by all means, open carry. But just know they're here in Denver, or not here in Denver, here in Colorado, the city of Denver, does not allow you to open carry, so definitely know your local laws before you start open carrying. All right, I hope that answers the question. Okay, so let's continue. All right, so loading a firearm, we're going to do that clearing procedure. Remember what I was talking about? Attempt to put on safe, drop the source of feed. Even if there's no source of feed, you want to make sure there's no source of feed. Lock the action to the rear, okay? And then at this point, you're going to do your 3-point safety check, your chamber, your magazine well, your slide face, and then you can load. Just take your full magazine, throw it in, let the slide go forward, now you're loaded. It's that simple, right? Well, we're going to cover more of this on the range when we get out there. You're welcome. Yeah, they said thanks. It's kind of random. All right, so avoid and manage an attack or confrontation, okay? This is, before the confrontation, I mean, obviously this is the most important, right, before any confrontation, right, is the avoid it altogether in the first place. But if you can't avoid it, then it transitions to like in the moment, and then after that, then it transfers to post-confrontation, your self-preservation, because you don't want to rot in jail, right? So that's part of it, right? It's not only about being able to defend yourself in the moment or even pre-moment, it's about defending yourself after the moment, right? So we want to stay alive, we want to stay out of jail. That's the goal. So avoidance is the key here, right? If somebody comes up to your car and they start scratching your car, should you let them, or are you going to confront them?
Please stop.
Yeah, maybe it's please stop. Maybe it's the thing about it is like if you're confronting them, you cannot defend your car with deadly physical force. Yeah. Does that make sense? And then you could be opening yourself up to civil liability if you harm them, even if it's not serious bodily injury. And by the way, if somebody comes to key your car with you in it, they're probably pretty crazy anyway. Yeah. It's probably not a good idea to, I know you want to, like I would want to be like, right? Yeah. But really, sometimes we just have to step back and like, is it really worth it? Right? Kind of thing. Yeah. All right. Maybe you need to take a different route. Say you want to go from point A to point B. Let's say you're in Denver, and in between point A and point B, you see somebody who looks a little off their rocker, is it better to go straight through it, or maybe you cross the street and go and keep going that same direction? Or maybe you go down the block and then just take a different route. Just saying. We do it all the time. I mean, I do it all the time. I think that most people will do it. Even if I know where I'm going from my house to another place, you know how I avoid traffic? I would just plug it into my Apple Maps. I'm like, they're like, you're avoiding traffic, right? It's the same concept. In this case, we're avoiding maybe potential confrontation, right? So, having someone else present. If you and I are walking, downtown or whatever, Denver, Colorado Springs, we are not likely to get attacked. Okay. This is especially true for females. Females are typically they're most vulnerable when it comes to attack because they're, and I'm not saying this to be true. I'm just saying they're seen as weaker than men. They're seen as a little less situationally aware. All these other things, right? And men are typically more violent than women. So this is especially true for females. They should travel in. That's the reason why they travel in packs when you're at the bar or at the club or something. There's 2 or 3 of them, and they know this full well. So having somebody else present while you're in public is a good thing too. Using words of respect and kindness, even if the other person is not respecting you or being kind. That can go a long way. I'm not saying it's going to take you to the end of the road there, but just doing that instead of escalating the situation is also a good thing. So if you start yelling obscenities at me, I start yelling obscenities at you, now it just escalates. Instead of me saying, hey, sir, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I'll go this way, no big deal, right? Now, I have to take my ego and have to swallow it a little bit, but that might avoid a confrontation altogether. Okay? Maintaining distance, right? So distance is your friend, even if you know how to fight. I covered this in one of my podcasts recently with the owner of Renzo Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. She was a sheriff, and anyway, go check out the podcast. The podcast is called Faces of Colorado Springs. She teaches others how to fight jiu-jitsu. She's a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. And, but yeah, you should know how to fight for sure. But you never know what the other person knows. Right. You don't know if they have any weapons on them. And you don't know their mentality. There's all these other things that one doesn't know. So, distance is your friend. We want to make sure we maintain that distance. And if it is an imminent threat, I would almost always go to the firearm first. I don't want to be on the ground with somebody. If it's an imminent threat, I almost would go to a firearm first, if I recognize it as an imminent threat. Okay. And know and understand your surroundings. So I teach. Losing puberty here. Sorry, guys. I teach security personnel as well, and I was a security guard for a little while. So there was a store. I can't remember the name of it. I think it was Nordstrom Rack. I think I was doing security for Nordstrom. And the idea there is to deter theft, right? So I'm standing there. I'm armed. I'm just watching people coming in and out. There's this one lady that came in, and she kind of looked off. And I was like, She doesn't look like she belongs here. Instead of confronting her, because she was acting kind of weird, I went to the cash register and asked the lady there, the receptionist there, hey, you guys know this lady? Sure enough, the lady was a regular. And she always comes in. She always does the same thing. Never harms anyone. Never doesn't seem like she's stealing anything. And so just by asking somebody with local knowledge, then I was able to have a better situational awareness. Right? So just understanding your surroundings, and sometimes that takes just the question of whether this is normal or Okay, so before confrontation, we talked about situational awareness, positioning. You have to position yourself in a manner to give you the upper hand. When I'm in Denver, or if I'm in a city that I don't know, or if I'm in a city at all, in fact, if I go to grab my phone, I put my back against the wall. So let's say there's a street on my left, and I'm walking this way, and I'm at the corner. I will literally back up against the building, grab my phone, and do whatever I'm going to do with my phone, put my phone away, and then go on about my way. And then the reason why I do that is nobody can come from behind me to do anything. Now, some might call that paranoia. I call it just being prepared, right? I'm not paranoid somebody's going to do anything. I just know that people can do nefarious things to strangers for whatever reason at any time, right? So now, do I do that all the time? No. If I'm in a rush, maybe I'll pull my phone out or whatever. But I still have my head on a swivel to understand my surroundings and positioning. Okay. Watching behaviors, we talked about that. Community knowledge, we talked about that a little bit, right? All right. So during confrontation, again, that politeness, it goes a long way. Sometimes we just need some time to cool off. Again, I was doing a security thing at a bank in Denver, and a guy came in super agitated about something with money. I think it took about 10 minutes of just him going back and forth. And then finally he was like, after that time, he was like, okay. And after he calmed down, then he was able to get the issue resolved. At no point in time was he ever threatening or anything, but he was just agitated. Yeah. Now, had I come up to him like, if you don't quiet down, I'm gonna kick you out of here or whatever, that probably could have escalated things, right? Instead, letting somebody vent may actually help the situation. But that being said, you need to be stern and confident, and you need to just let them know you're not gonna let it go any further than what they've already gotten to, right? And you need to be prepared to defend yourself and or others if you choose to defend others in the event it becomes an immediate and imminent threat situation. Okay? And then always be prepared to call 911. Okay, so these are arms attorneys. Like I said, I watch these guys all the time. I like for my customers to hear about things from lawyers, right? Because lawyers, they have their Juris Doctorate, and that's what they do. They practice this stuff. They understand the law better than, let's say, you and I could in this setting. So, 3 things we're not going to watch is provocation, immediacy, and proportionality, right? There's a provocation. I can't provoke you to defend yourself, and then I pull out my firearm and defend myself, right? I can't claim self-defense in that case, right? I cannot provoke you to cause a reaction where I would feel threatened, if that makes sense. Yeah. Immediacy. So this brings the question of whether you should or should not issue a warning shot to an immediate threat. Should you fire a warning shot before you take care of an immediate threat or imminent threat? Okay. This is the conundrum here, right? I could see both sides of it. I could see the prosecution, because that's where this could ultimately end up, this court. Yeah. I could see the prosecution saying he wasn't immediately threatened. There was no imminency there, okay? Therefore, he could fire a warning shot. So, should he have used self-defense at all? And I could see the defense saying, he didn't want to shoot the other guy. He wanted the other guy to live. You see what I'm saying? Me personally, if it's an imminent and immediate threat, I'm shooting the person. Bottom line. Because if I pull my firearm and I point it at somebody, like I said before, the prosecution could potentially say, that's deadly physical force right there. Just pointing the gun at somebody. Right? I could see that argument. Now, I'm not saying they would, it's going to depend on the jurisdiction. So, I personally would not issue a warning shot. Outside of that, let's say you do issue a warning shot, skips off the ground, hits some lady or somebody else, some innocent bystander. Now you have a bigger problem on your hands because, yeah, you used deadly physical force because you shot at this person, and let's say it ricocheted and hit somebody else. Now you have a bigger problem. So I would not ever issue a warning shot. Yeah. Proportionality. You and I, we went at it at each other like we're pretty proportionate, right? Now, my wife, she's very petite, and if you had attacked her and she pulled out a firearm and shot you in your skull and you died, she would probably be given more leniency and it would be more justified for her. Now, if she attacked you and you pulled out a firearm and shot her into her skull, they're like, oh, come on, really? Like, really? Like, she's like $125, really? Right? You see what I'm saying? The other thing comes into question, and this is how lawyers are sneaky. You know, so I'm a special forces guy, weapons sergeant, firearms instructor, like I do competitions, like all these things, right? They're going to say, if somebody attacks me and I happen to defend myself, they're going to say, no, you had all this training. You should have been able to avoid the situation and do all this other stuff, right? Versus somebody who has zero training. So it's like a double-edged sword, you know what I'm saying? You have zero training, but now you're defenseless. But then you have this training. Now you can defend yourself, but it's going to be used against you. Just the proportionality of that. And the other thing is, like, if somebody in a wheelchair shoots somebody who's attacking them, they're going to be given more points, let's say, when they say, I had to defend myself. Right. Okay, let's watch this, because I think they really hit the nail on the head here, and I enjoyed it.
It's taking advantage of reasonable we're on the street and even in states that have a standing ground law. We're in Texas. We have a very powerful standing ground law that says, if you're in a place you're legally allowed to be, you're not committing a crime, you didn't provoke the person, that you're allowed to stand your ground, and a jury will actually be instructed that they are not to consider your failure to retreat for any reason. But I will tell you, as a practical matter, they consider it all day, even if a judge do you have anything to add? A reasonable, safe alternative?
Yeah, absolutely. And, Rich and I are both former prosecutors as well. There are a lot of trials under our belts. I don't think I ever had a jury that did instructed just stop you from thinking about things.
All right. So you're talking about safe alternatives. You heard, like, juries are out wild animals. We have to assume that if we discharge our firearm in self-defense, that it could lead to a jury trial. And we have to assume that. If we don't assume that, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice and potentially being very arrogant that we will not be prosecuted. Okay? So if juries are wild animals, then like I said, it's best to avoid the situation altogether, of course, right? But for a multitude of reasons. One, you don't want to get hurt yourself. Two, you don't want to be facing a jury of your peers or judge, right? Three, you don't want to have to go to counseling or something of that nature. Four, you want to maintain your financial status, right? Because you know this is shit, it's expensive. So to avoid and to maybe potentially do those safe alternatives is way better, unless you know for a fact it's an immediate and imminent threat. And then you need to be able to articulate that. You have to assume that you have to articulate that to a jury of your peers, right? And those peers may or may not be gun friendly, and they may or may not agree with you if they are gun friendly. Okay? So, reasonableness. Here we go. All right. So you heard it from the lawyers, man. I think it's important. Remember when I can't remember his name. The lawyer, the man there, he was saying there's things that are subjective, and there's also things that are objective, like the amount of rounds that were fired, weights and measurements and stuff like that. So, which brings us to our post-confrontation, because in the post-confrontation, there will be interaction with law enforcement, and you need to know what your rights are, and you need to know what not to say or what to say, right? Which is basically nothing. You don't need to say anything, right? You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to counsel, and you should invoke both of those rights immediate and often. Now, that's not to say that there's some things that might be beneficial to you, but do you know what those are? And if you did know what those were, or are, then in that moment, are you going to be able to think clearly? So that's the other thing, right? So let's talk about that real quick. Okay, so post-confrontation. There's an immediate threat, imminent threat. I pull my firearm, I shoot him, dead. Okay? Or maybe not shoot them, maybe they're wounded or whatever it is. But I stop the threat. Okay? That's ultimately what you want to do. You want to stop the threat. You don't necessarily want to murder somebody and then claim self-defense, or harm somebody and then claim self-defense. You want to stop the threat. And typically speaking, just the mere production of a firearm will stop the threat. Okay? So let's say I did that. Bam. Okay. My next step should be, am I okay? Is the scene safe? And are my loved ones, if I'm with my loved ones, are they okay? And is the scene safe? That should be my next step. And this is Dave's point of view. This might not be everybody's opinion. Okay? Emergency intervention. So if you are EMS or police officer or something, you might be required by law to render aid, even if you just shot them. Now, if you're not one of those people that is required by law to render aid, then that's up to you what you're going to do. Whether you're going to leave them laying or render aid, that's going to be up to you, your choice. Now, my personal opinion, I'm not going to render aid because, well, maybe I don't have gloves. I don't know what kind of disease they have. Like, I'm still protecting myself in that sense as well. Even though I want them to survive, I may have to wait because I still don't know if the scene's safe. And if you have your daughter or something, it's just going to be depending on the situation. Okay? And maybe I know this person, maybe I don't know. Maybe the person that attacked me, I know them, I still love them, I want them to survive. Maybe I will render aid. It's just going to really depend on the situation, right? All right. Now, preservation of evidence, we talked about this a little bit. Do not unload your firearm. Leave it exactly how it is, okay? You or someone else, and I suggest that you do, call 911. The reason why I say that you should probably call 911 and be the first one to call 911 is the simple fact that it's going to show that you weren't doing anything nefarious. You knew, you did what you're supposed to do, and then you call 911. You're in essence kind of telling them yourself that, something happened, right? Right. And notice I didn't say you're not telling yourself that you shot somebody. Something happened. You want the police and EMS to come. Now, you're not going to self-incriminate, okay? So, there's one story I know. My brother-in-law is a firearms instructor in California. One of his students had an accidental discharge with a pistol. The pistol round went through the wall. It's an apartment, and missed everybody in the other apartment, but it still went to the wall. The customer, my brother-in-law, called my brother-in-law. Was like, "Hey, I just had an accidental discharge. What do I do?" My brother-in-law said, "Hang up the phone and call 911." The police showed up, and they told the customer that he was the first one to call 911, so they're not taking him to jail. Had it been the apartment people, the other apartment, that guy probably would have went to jail, right? All right, so I believe that you should call 911 first, and you should be the one to call them, not someone else, right? Anyway, so that's my take on that. The interaction with police. So what are you going to do? Are you going to stand there with a gun in your hand and the police are coming? No. You're going to look like a threat. You don't want to look like a threat. Right. What you want to do, and this is my opinion, and it's based off of this lawyer that we're going to talk about. Leave the gun loaded. Put it where you got it from. Whether it's your holster, whether it's your truck, whether it's a lockbox, put it right back where you got it from. If it's safe to do so, of course. Right? And then, for example, let's say you're concealed carrying. You had to use the firearm for self-defense. and you call 911, you hear the sirens, or maybe even before you hear the sirens, you put it away, because if you have the firearm in your hand, then people can see that, and you'd rather have it like not seen, right? Not to make a scene, even further than what one already is. So you put it back, and then when they come, you just raise your hands, and then they're going to see you from the description, and you're going to say, okay. And they're going to give you commands. You're going to comply with the commands, and then they're going to disarm you, right? And that means so in doing so, you weren't looking like a threat to police officers. You weren't looking like a threat to anyone else. You didn't tamper with evidence. You've called 911 to show that you weren't the bad guy here, so to speak. You've done everything in your power, legally speaking. Okay. So, and then when they come, you need to invoke your rights early and often. Okay. And I say early and often because you might invoke your right, but then they might try to circumvent that somehow to get more information. So you always just need to say, I'm going to invoke my right to remain silent. That's all I have to say until I talk to counsel, right? Invoke your right to silence and counsel early and often. And you don't have to believe it from me, right? We're going to see 3 different videos here. And that's going to be attorneys on retainer. It's going to be Washington gun law. And it's going to be armed attorneys. They all say the same thing. And that's to shut up. That literally, that's what they say. If something happens, you just got to shut up, right? And this isn't that video, but when we get into it, you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay? I do like the way. Actually, this is the video. Okay, so you have 3 different videos. Here's armed attorneys, and they have, like I said, it's uncanny, the message that they're giving. Okay, so when you call it 911, you're going to have to say something. Right? Now, it's not going to be like, hey, I just shot somebody. Right? It's going to be something like, they're going to say, hey, what's your emergency? Hey, somebody was just shot. You didn't self-incriminate. Somebody was just shot. I need police and EMS at this location. Again, you're going to have to confirm the location. And then you're going to give your description, right? You say, hey, I'm in a black shirt, white hat, with white shoes. I'm about 5'8". I have dark complected skin, and I'll be at this location, whatever this location is. Okay? So nowhere in that statement were you giving self-incriminating evidence, right? You didn't say that you were the shooter. You didn't say how many rounds you shot. You didn't even say that you were attacked. Now, you could say that you were attacked. You could say, hey, I was attacked and I had to defend myself. Now, they're going to probably probe a little bit. When they start probing, other than, what's your name, like, who are you, where's your location? And when they start probing for more information, more specific information, you can literally just hang up. You can literally just hang up. And which, me personally, if I was in that situation, I would make sure they know my location and who I am, and then I would hang up. After, because they don't need to know anything else, because it's recorded the second that you call. That even before, once you push 911, it's going to start recording. And if you say something that's incriminating on that recording, it's going to be used against you in a court of law. Right? Does that make sense? So I would definitely just hang up as soon as they have the information they need to get there. Okay? All right. The next. All right. I love this guy. He's former Marine. So, okay, full disclosure, I'm an attorneys on retainer affiliate. I am also a client. I pay the monthly fee, the annual fee for both me and my wife. I do believe that there should be, people should, it sucks to say this, but today's day and age, especially with the political whims, I think you need some kind of coverage. Okay, and we can talk about coverage in a minute, but I'm an attorney on retainer affiliate. You can see the affiliate link below for those of you who are watching online. Definitely do your research, and then we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I love this guy. He's like straight to the point, super awesome. So, okay, so remain silent, but not only remain silent, but also invoke your right to counsel. Right, both of those things. Okay. Last one. All right. All of them agree. Like, don't make any statements to police officers. So there's obviously good cops and bad cops out there, but all of them are only trying to get information, right? And that information is going to be used against you in court of law. Remember, the Miranda rights, they don't say that anything you say can and will be used for you. It says can and will be used against you. Okay? So the obvious choice there is to just shut up. Now, are you going to remember, what he said to say? No, right? But what you can remember is, like, be respectful to the police officer and say something like, officer, I am not comfortable speaking right now. I need to talk to counsel. Or something of that nature. Something, right? That shows that you're invoking silence and counsel. Okay? Those two things together. And then that needs to be, you need to be standing right in front of the law enforcement officer because they have to have cameras. Yeah. And that needs to be on camera, okay? Because if you invoke your right to silence and counsel right then and there, and then they still press you, and you end up saying something that's incriminating, and then that's tried to use against you in court of law later, it can be inadmissible in court. But then if you don't say that, if you don't invoke your right to remain silent and counsel, and it's not recorded, okay, then they can claim that you never did. You see what I'm saying? So always invoke your right to remain silent and counsel. I don't know how many times I've said that in this class, but hopefully I get the point across. All right, anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. Okay, so just remember that whenever something happens. All right, so we're going to talk about we're not going to watch this. This is when I was a USCCA issue. This is when I was a US Law Shield affiliate, and I've changed, okay? So I changed from the US Law Shield to attorneys on retainer. So let's just explain something real quick. Insurance companies cannot, I repeat, cannot insure criminal activity. Okay? An attorney, if you retain an attorney, they can represent you no matter the crime. Okay? Even murderers get counsel. Rapists get counsel. Pedophiles get counsel. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm going here? Yeah. All right. I am not smart enough to say whether US Law Shield or USCCA or any of these other companies are insurance companies or not recognized by the state. I am smart enough to say if I retain an attorney, regardless of my actions, that attorney can represent me. All right? Yeah. Attorneys on retainer is just that. They are retained attorneys if you have to defend yourself, period. So let's say you're a prohibited person. Let's say you're a felon and you're carrying unlawfully, but you still have to defend yourself. They still will and can and will defend you in a court of law. So are you or I smart enough to know all the laws all the time? Exactly. So do you know that you're going to be breaking the law? At that moment, do you know every law of every jurisdiction in every situation that you could possibly? So my point is, even though you try to do the right thing, you try to be a law-abiding citizen, you could potentially, unbeknownst to you, break the law. And then if you break the law, these other companies could drop you like a bad habit. Attorneys on retainer will not. So just look at that, right? I don't think you need insurance. I think you need attorney coverage. The safest option, honestly, is if you had the money to fork over a retainer to a local lawyer, a Colorado lawyer. That way you can always call them. Yeah. But I don't have the time to go and research which lawyers are pro 2A and which lawyers aren't, right? So I just go with attorneys on retainer. All right. Pistols and folks, do you know the difference between single action, double action, and revolvers? Or single action and double action pistols, excuse me. Okay. We'll cover a little bit more on the range, but in layman's terms, in order for a single action revolver to shoot, or revolver, I keep saying revolver. In order for a single action firearm to shoot, it first must be cocked, which means the firing mechanism has to be under spring tension. So when you pull the trigger, the firing mechanism goes forward. Okay? So that's single action. A double action, the firing mechanism does not have to be cocked initially. When you pull the trigger, it is cocking. It is cocking at the same time as you pull the trigger, and at a certain time it releases. So it cocks it and releases it. That's double action. Basically, in layman's terms, that's what it is. Like I said, when we get on the range, we'll cover that. This is a pretty cool video that I found online. It's talking about the cycle of functions, right? There's 8 functions in a cycle. If I had an automatic firearm and I pulled the trigger, it would just keep going through the cycle, right? Without interruption, unless there was a malfunction or something like that. But if I just hold down the trigger, it just keep going. The reason why we have semi-automatic firearms is because it can only go through one cycle before I have to let go of the trigger and then pull the trigger again. So for every pull of the trigger, it goes through one cycle, right? So feeding, chamber, locking, firing, unlocking, extraction, ejection, and cocking. Every pull of the trigger goes through that one cycle, okay? So let's just watch this video here. Got some cool music too. I'm just kidding. You dance. All right, watch this. Watch this part right here. Please, right part. That's called the sear. Right here. This is called the sear. All right. Now, as it goes forward, it starts to feed. We're here in the feed there, and it's going to start to chamber, which is here. Now, notice right here, this sear. It's cocking. It just cocked that. So it kind of does it simultaneously. That's down here. But it locked right here. Let's go back. See how the barrel is kind of down? The blue part? All right. As it goes forward, now watch it fall in place. That's the locking. That's the locking part of this cycle. Okay? And then this is the cocking. And I have to say that this cycle doesn't have to happen in sequential order, right? So there's some things happening almost simultaneously as we're doing it. Like, for example, the locking and the cocking on this one, it's doing it almost simultaneously. So then we're going to fire, so that sear, when we come back, see, we're going to fire, that sear releases, this is a single action firearm, it releases that striker, allowing the striker to hit the back of the primer of the cartridge. It's going to fire. So here we are, firing. Then it's going to unlock. Watch the barrel. It comes down. It's going to unlock, extract. It's extracting it from the chamber, and it's going to eject it from the firearm altogether. So the extraction and the ejecting, and then it just goes through that one cycle with every pull of the trigger. There you go. Now, what's not shown in here is called a disconnector. The disconnector is what disconnects the cycle. So when you pull the trigger, the sear releases the firing mechanism. So the firing mechanism goes forward, okay? And it strikes the back of the primer. If you held down the trigger and it was out of the cycle, and you release that trigger, you hear that click. That click resets so you can do the cycle again. Without that disconnector, it's basically a semi-automatic, or it's basically an automatic firearm. Right? Disconnector disconnects that sight. Okay. Hey, we got 5 viewers. Hey, man. Hey, guys, what's going on? Hey, guys, what's going on? All right. So now we're talking about the fundamentals of marksmanship. I'm going to teach these as if, excuse me. I'm going to teach these as they were taught to me in special operations. Okay. So depending on who you talk to, there's either 4, there's 5, there's 8, there's 10,000. Basically, you want to have a steady position, steady grip, steady trigger control, and you want to be able to see the target through your sights, right? So, we're talking about position, grip, sight alignment, sight picture, trigger squeeze, trigger reset, breathing, and follow through, okay? The position is just that. You could be standing, sitting down, whatever. It still needs to be stable, mobile, and balanced, okay? Your grip, arguably the most important fundamental, is going to be your grip, followed by your trigger control, which would be your trigger squeeze and trigger reset. Your silent sight picture, getting those things aligned. You've shot before, I'm sure, right? All right, so you understand your front sight is supposed to be clear, your rear sight is supposed to be blurry, and your target's supposed to be blurry as well. And then the equal light, equal height. You understand the concept of that, right? Yeah. Okay. Like, again, when we get on the range, we'll cover more of it. I can't really do a whole lot here in the classroom to expand upon that idea or that concept. Trigger squeeze, trigger reset, breathing. Do you understand what diaphragmatic breathing is? All right. So a lot of people will breathe from our chest, and if we hold out our arms like we have a firearm, go ahead and do so, like you have a firearm, and you breathe from your chest, what happens? Right. Now, diaphragmatic breathing is like this. When I breathe in, I'm going to push my belly out. And when I breathe out, I'm going to use my core muscles to bring my belly in. So hold your arms out, and then just try that diaphragmatic breathing, and you'll see that your arms don't go up and down. They kind of stay still. So when we're talking about breathing, when we're out on the range, I want you to try to engage in that diaphragmatic breathing. Okay? And then follow through. Follow through is nothing more than getting a second shot picture if we shoot 1 round, getting a third sight picture if we shoot 2, 4 sight picture if we shoot 3. You get the idea? And the reason why we're doing that, especially in a self-defense situation, if I have to draw my firearm and shoot my firearm to defend myself, I want to make sure the threat has ceased to be a threat. Now that could be, oh my God, I'm shot, and they lay down on the ground and they're still alive. And that could be, they're not alive. It just depends on what the situation dictates, right? If they cease to be a threat, it could also be, let's say if somebody comes at you with a baseball bat and they're running at you like this, that's pretty imminent, right? They're going to bash your cranium in, but as soon as they let go of that baseball bat and turn around, is that imminency now? So you need to be able to decipher in a split second what's immediate and what's not. Because if you shoot somebody in the back, you're going to have a hard time to justify. You're going to have a hard time to justify why it was immediate, an immediate threat. Okay? So having that follow through, if you have to shoot your firearm to defend yourself, is to make sure the threat has ceased to be a threat. And then you can move on to the next step of making sure the scene is safe, 911, all those other things that we already talked about. Okay. On the range, we're going to focus on grip and trigger squeeze. Grip and trigger squeeze. We're not going to watch this video. I'll just talk about position. We'll talk about grip. Here's grip. We will watch this. We'll watch this in a little bit. I probably can't show this actually, because I'm gonna have a firearm on here. Well, maybe. I don't know. Let's see. Let's see what YouTube's gonna do. I think YouTube doesn't allow firearms live because there's been instances where there's been like a mass shooting or something like that, and they've done it live. Well, I don't have a firearm in my hand, and it's on there. So let's see what YouTube's gonna do. YouTube, don't shut me down. All right, here we go. Let's see. It's called capillary refill. So the reason why we get high up, you got to think of a barrel, right? And let's say if this was a barrel, and I can control, if I can get behind the barrel, I can control the recoil better this way. But if I get really low on it, right, then it's gonna have more leverage on me than I'm gonna have on it. Does that make sense? So the higher you can get up onto the gun, the better. And that goes both with your strong hand and your support hand, right? If you get onto it really low, that gun's going to have a lot of leverage on you, and you're not going to be very accurate with it. My skin here, I get. I still shoot over here. So, so you see that right? Are you right-handed? I'm right-handed. Okay. So you see what thumb is there, right? That's real estate that our support hand can be. And I'll cover this in a minute. But that's real estate where this part can be. How much is there more skin on my thumb, or is there more skin on this hand? Right here. Yeah, exactly. So the more skin you can put on the gun, the better. You have more. You're maximizing friction on the actual firearm, right? So what I like to tell people is like, I want them to grab their firearm and point at the target and squeeze as hard as they can, and it's going to shake. And then I want them to relax their grip until it stops shaking, until it starts to become steady. And then at that point, that's as much pressure you need with your strong arm, right? Because a lot of people, they ask, well, how much pressure should I be using with my hands? I was like, I don't know. Like, how do you measure that? You know, right? It's not like we have a measuring device. You know what I mean? But it's going to be how hard can you grab it without it shaking, without disturbing the sights, right? So that's kind of what I tell people to do. Oh gosh, what happened? Get back over here. Okay. So when we talk about support hand, you absolutely should squeeze, again, as hard as you can without moving the sights, but it's going to be harder than your support hand, okay? Because you want to be able to squeeze, not only squeeze this way, right? But you want to squeeze these hands together, right? Because you're trying to create a vise, right? So if I was going to put something in a vise and then crank the vise down, the vise goes together as opposing forces, right? And that's what you want to do with both of these hands. But with this one in particular, you want to squeeze a little bit harder than this one, right? Or for those of you who are left-handed or wrong-handed, I'm talking about using your support hand, squeezing harder than your strong hand. All right, so let's do this. Anyway, let's do this exercise. Just put your hands together. Take your left hand and just rotate your left hand as much as you can, like really over exaggerated, and then close your hands on each other. Now that top thumb, just pick anything on the wall or whatever. I want you to point that top thumb at something, anything at all. Yeah. So you feel that pressure right here in your left hand? Yeah. Okay. So that's the tension you should feel on the range. Okay. Now the other thing I want you to do is just do the same thing, but now take your elbows and just come out slightly. Yep. Now you should feel pressure here and here, right? So again, when you have that firearm in your hand and you're out there on the range, you should feel that pressure here. You should feel pressure here and here, right? At a minimum, right? And then we can get into some advanced stuff like maybe using your pinky and ring fingers to manage a little bit more muzzle flip, stuff like that. But ultimately, that's what it is. All right. So alignment, that was a good video. I don't know why I deleted it. For a red dot, this is pretty cool. So here's your red dot. You're going to get a red dot, super awesome, but you still need to focus on the fundamentals. Notice that the red dot isn't exactly in the middle, right? And that's why they're so cool. hear that click?
Yeah.
That's the disconnect. All right. So your disengagement. Oh, I gotta redo that video. Disconnect. All right, then drawing a firearm, which we're not gonna cover. Okay. Next is the written test. It's an open book test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this up, and then if you have any questions, I can just flip through those slides, go to wherever the answer is, and then you can just jot down the answer. Okay. For those of you who are watching live, that concludes the live portion of this. We're going to try to, every concealed carry class I do, I'm going to try to stream it live. So if you ever need a refresher, you can just come on live and check it out. But other than that, you guys, thanks for coming and checking us out here today. And we'll catch you on the flip side. Check out.